ladies and gentlemen, I must not tell you that we are living in challenging times. The old certainties are gone, and there is no time for complacency, and certainly not time for sitting back and relax. On the contrary, this is the moment for all of us to invest into innovation, leading to new jobs, new products, making Europe prosperous, dynamic, a Europe that will grow out of the crisis. And in order to get that done, we mustn't be gloomy, we must be forward-looking, and we must have the punch to go ahead. And that means that all of us, policymakers, industry, leaders in government, have to take action to further break down the persisting barriers to our internal market. An internal market with 500 million potential consumers, which is our greatest asset, actually. And I think it is really not very efficient not to use this asset to its full. And I think it's very efficient to put everything in place in order to break down the remaining barriers. One of those actions to break down the remaining barriers will be the implementation of a European contract law. And that will, as has already been said, affect us all: consumers, companies, citizens, the economy in general, but most of all, the SMEs. And as you write in your Lisbon Council policy brief, which is going to be presented soon, the rise of the micro-multinational, that policymakers tend to focus on economic incumbents and on existing markets rather than on the newcomers. But it is very often the newcomers, these startups, very often the small businesses, that are today's key engine of growth and jobs. So we have to concentrate on those, expand their possibilities, expand their market opportunities, and that is exactly what the proposal for an optional common sales law for the European Union wants to focus on. Exactly on those small companies, so that they can take advantage of our single market by expanding into new market opportunities. We want to create the legal infrastructure that will bring them the needed legal certainty while keeping the legal costs very low. Now, you all know that contract law is not something abstract. It is not something that only lawyers should care about. It is part of our everyday life. Every economic transaction needs a contract, and every contract is governed by law. So contract law is a tool that allows economic transactions to happen, and it is the oil that keeps the economic machinery turning. It is a central element in the establishment of our single market. However, in the daily experience of traders and of consumers, the legal diversity of Europe's contract law systems is a very concrete obstacle to cross-border transaction, and this is notably the case in transactions between businesses and consumers. Now, you certainly recall the recent ruling of the European Court of Justice, which has decided that the mere fact that a small business operates a website in a language of another member state can be seen as an indication that this business is directing its products and services to consumers of these other member states. In terms of contract law, This means that the small business must respect not only the rules in its country of establishment, but also the rules that apply to the country where the consumer is resident. And for a small business, that means huge risks, new risks. You need to get costly legal advice on the other legal system in the neighboring country, and you might face the risk of being sued in the other country. Now the questions, which law applies? Can I trust the legal system of other countries? Where and for which price can I get swift and reliable legal advice? All of those questions become important factors for companies, but also for consumers. Take, for example, the purchase, a very simple one, of a book from Amazon or another similar site. Several national contract laws may apply at the same time, leading to a substantial degree of legal uncertainty. Now, what does this mean in practice? Let's consider the jumping through a number of hoops to make sure a contract is legally correct. Businesses wishing to carry out cross-border transactions may have to adapt to 26 different national contracts laws, which means translating them, seek legal advice. This costs time and money. Adapting to another additional export market costs on average 10,000 euros. And adapting your website can cost up to 3,000 euros. And to make things worse, these costs grow proportionately to the number of European countries a company trades with. And logically, these costs have the biggest impact on small businesses, on micro companies, as the costs make a higher share of the turnover. So money and time is a precious commodity during those days. And a lot of traders, especially those which are in small and medium-sized industries, do not have the necessary resources to go through the process of adapting to new markets. So what they do, they simply abdicate from expanding to new markets. In a recent survey, we found out that 75% of European traders currently do not sell cross-border. And those who do sell cross-border limit themselves to a very restricted number of territories. What a waste of opportunities, what a waste of possibilities. And our research also confirms that the differences between contracts laws are one of the principal obstacles in the way cross-border trade is done. 55% of the companies active cross-border or interested to go cross-border say they were held back by a range of contract law-related obstacles. For them, this is more important than differences in language and culture. So the problem is clear. The contract law patchwork across the EU hampers the single market, is a barrier to growth, is a barrier to commerce, and this comes at a cost. The loss of income in intra-EU trade per year based on this problem is 26 billion euro. Now that is a lot of money to have or not to have in times of economic crisis. So what we have in place in this precious internal market today is neither smart nor sustainable. We must do the contrary. Instead of blocking cross-border trade. We must favor it in order to boost our economies. And that is why it is responsible of policymakers to break down the barriers which are stopping us from doing this. And the problem is not just about traders. The problem is equally about consumers who want to shop cross-border. Consumers are uncertain about their rights when confronted with different foreign laws. What rights would they have if they bought a defective good? If they do not know the answer, if they do not get an assurance, well, then they lose confidence and they decide not to buy cross-border, and by that way they restrict their chances and they restrict the chances of the trader to sell. Consumers definitely are put here in a lose-lose situation, disadvantaged by a limited choice and often having to pay for a higher price on their domestic market. What now if a consumer nevertheless wants to buy cross-border? Well, then it might happen that this consumer is refused sale or delivery by the trader. We regret, but the product you requested is not available for your country. That is what I explained just before, that the traders just go to 1.8 markets in average. That means the other 25 are not in. And when a consumer gets such a message, then he feels frustrated and is discouraged from shopping online cross-border. So the situation is negative as well for traders, as well for consumers. What can we do in order to solve the problem? When I took on the mission as EU Commissioner for Justice, I decided to tackle this question head-on, because I knew we had to deal with barriers in that domain. But I wanted also to find a solution which would respect national legal traditions whilst propelling our internal market forward. That is why in July 2010 I put several options on the table, ranging from binding and non-binding toolboxes that EU lawmakers could draw from when adopting new legislation to ensure a better coherence of rules, to, on the other extreme, a fully fledged European civil code replacing all national contract rules. We publicly consulted on these proposals during 4 months. We received 320 responses, pledging for all the different possibilities on the table. My reflection on those. There were some proponents who argued for the idea of a toolbox. I've been thinking about that, because a toolbox is an interesting concept. But I came to the conclusion that in those difficult times, it is not the moment to put the tools in a box. I think we just cannot afford to leave the tools in a box. I believe that Europe must do the contrary. We have to take the tools in the hand. We have to put them to use. And those tools do not come out of the blue. You see, they have been thought about during decades, 2 decades, by experts and practitioners who have worked on developing those tools. Now, I think it is time to take the tools a step further and turn them into an operational system. An easy-to-use, optional common sales law for the European Union with a high level of consumer protection to be used in cross-border transactions. A tool which will provide certainty to both consumers and businesses. A tool which will be low cost, anti-red tape, and it will be useful for boosting the internal market. This common sales law will leave national contract law or national legal traditions in place. And here comes the legal innovation of the whole thing, because it will be the first time that in an internal market movement, we do not go for elimination, replacement of national systems. We choose an innovative approach based on free choice, subsidiarity, and competition. The optional EU common sales law will be the set of concise, user-friendly rules existing in the same way in all member states, in all official EU languages, which parties can choose to use as a contract for their cross-border transactions. And I insist on the word choose. This optional nation will fit well the principle of freedom of contract. It means that those traders that feel comforted by the statu quo, they are left free to carry on trading under their own national law or under the national law of another member state. On the other hand, those traders who see the advantage of a common set of rules for their cross-border transactions may opt for that regime. In short, the optional EU rules will provide an alternative which makes cross-border transactions easier and cheaper. It is a win-win situation for businesses and consumers alike. I hope that such a new regime will soon become a mark of quality for consumers to rely upon, because they need confidence to venture across borders when they shop. They need to know that the optional instrument is a guarantee for high level of consumer protection. For example, the optional common sales law provides the consumer with a free choice between several remedies if faulty goods are delivered to them. Can choose whether he wants the good to be repaired, replaced, a price reduction, or the termination of the contract. Now you must know that under the majority of the national laws, the consumers do not have this choice. Some might now ask me, all right, it sounds wonderful for the consumer, but what is in for the company? Well, there is in a win-win situation, because the company extends its market and reaches out to an important number of potential consumers at low cost or at no cost. That means the balance in trade here is very clear. The consumers will have confidence the trader can go cross-border without worrying. SMEs are often frequently lumped together with all other businesses. But you are right in your paper to make a difference here, because SMEs are not the same. They have limited resources in terms of time, personnel, and finances. And that means they can sometimes be as vulnerable as consumers. When you look at the link between big companies and SMEs, or at the link between traders and consumers. And that is why the common sales law's provision acknowledges this fact, and in contracts between businesses, it declares non-individually negotiated terms which are unfair as non-binding. This makes sure that the party with a stronger bargaining power, a large company, for instance, does not take undue advantage of this stronger position by imposing unfair sales conditions. Many national laws do not contain such a safeguard for the weaker party. The European contract law will contain such a safeguard. The European contract law will also be useful for online sales, because a trader could use one single contract online and one single IT platform to trade with consumers from multiple member states. Now, we all know in this room that the digital economy is becoming increasingly important. And that is why we have to ensure that whatever laws we make, they are future-proof. And therefore, digital contracts will also fall within the scope of the new proposal. This means that the common sales law could be used, for example, when buying music, films, software or applications that are downloaded from the internet. Those products will be covered irrespective of whether they are stored or not on a tangible medium such as a CD or a DVD. Ladies and gentlemen, the important decision to propose such an optional common sales law for the European Union was not taken on a whim. When I spoke with European businesses, when we made our inquiries with them, 70% of them said they would look forward to use a single European contract law for cross-border sales as an alternative to national laws, thus starting or increasing their cross-border operations. The European businesses made it very clear that they have an appetite for such an instrument, but they also warned against creating an instrument that would be a red tape solution. This is why we choose a simple, cheap, efficient way of setting the legal environment for contract law, promoting the single market and giving businesses, both new and established, access to 500 million consumers. We also choose the spirit of competitiveness. The optional common sales law will become a success only if and because it is chosen. It is not imposed. So the freedom of choice is always on the table for businesses and consumers alike. And so it will only work if it is attractive. It will not work because it is imposed. Ladies and gentlemen, I have conceived this idea and this putting into practice an idea as a gift. A gift to companies and consumers, of course, but most of all, a gift for next year's 20th anniversary of the European single market. We know a lot has been achieved. We know a lot has to be achieved. I'm convinced that thinking out of the box and acting out of the box will make these achievements to happen much more quickly.